Okay, just want to go over kind of the process of blasting the car. But first, I kind of wanted to do a bit of a public service announcement here. So this is a media blaster. It is not a sandblaster. It even has a warning here on it that says, do not put sand in it. If you use sand as a blasting media, what can happen is, because sand has a lot of silica in it, those silica particles are going to break up, obviously, in the blasting process and create dust. And those dust particles, because of the way they're shaped, are going to get stuck to the inside of your lungs, and your lungs won't be able to do anything about it. So they'll make scar tissue around that area to cover up the particle. And that can continue to happen until your lungs can no longer keep you alive and you die. So seems like a pretty terrible way to go. I think the disease is called scoliosis or something like that. But anyways, just don't use sand. It's not worth it. Yes, sand is cheaper than any blasting media, but it's not worth it. Even OSHA recommends that if you're going to be using actual sand for blasting, you have to have a total fresh air suit. Basically, essentially it's going to be like a diving suit in terms of your air supply. And then you have to wash off before you take your clothes off, before you take your suit off, so that you don't stir up any dust while you're taking your suit off. Then you take your clothes off, then you immediately go shower to get any dust off of you. And even with all of that, you still run the risk of potentially having a problem. So it's just not worth messing with. Just spend I don't think I spent certainly not more than $100 on blasting media, and I still have a bunch that I can reuse. So the blasting media I used, the first one I tried was one that was called Clean Bite, and it was a crushed glass media, and it's this lighter colored stuff right here. And now it was fine for taking the paint off, but it would not even touch the rust. So this black stuff here was called, it was made by a brand called Black Diamond, and it was coal slag. The Clean Bite was crushed glass. So the Black Diamond worked a whole lot better on the rust, but it still took quite a bit of effort to get it worked off. So you can see this spot here used to have a bunch of rust, a dark spot, which was basically leftover rust that the Clean Bite would not take off, but the Black Diamond did take it off. It just takes a little bit of time. You just have to sit there and work at it. And this is just a Eastwood media blaster. And on the topic of this thing, you have to be incredibly careful while using one of these, because this is a pressurized vessel. So treat it with respect. There's a whole lot of stored energy in it. So be careful. Don't, do something stupid with it. Never weld on one of these and then reuse it. But you got to be incredibly careful with these, because you don't want to unscrew that while the tank is still pressurized. So my operating procedure here that I was doing is I would shut this valve, take the air hose off, so that way the tank didn't just immediately depressurize in an uncontrolled manner. And then I'd crack this valve open, drain it all the way back down to zero, leave this valve open so I can see this valve is open, there's no air coming out, the gauge says zero. Then I would slowly undo that and keep the important bits of my body away from that. I'm not going to open it standing directly over it. That would be stupid. So just follow the instructions with one of these. Be incredibly mindful of how dangerous they can be. Don't exceed the pressure rating. If it clogs up and you have to mess with it, shut it down, unhook the hose, depressurize it, verify absence of energy, that there isn't any compressed air left in it, and then work on it. I'm unsure what the fatigue risk is regarding a pressure vessel like this, but as a safe practice, I always filled it slowly with air rather than hitting it with the full pressure. Okay, so this is not the safety equipment I'm recommending. I'm just saying this is the safety equipment I was using. Always use your own judgment, because it's ultimately your health that's on the line. So for, eye and face protection, basically any part of your body that is exposed is going to get torn up. So long sleeves, long pants. Got one of these hood things that totally covered up my head. It's got a plastic thing in there. And this was a huge pain. I could only blast for, I don't know, depending on where on the car I was at, 3 minutes, maybe closer to 10. And then you have to stop, take this out, wipe it down so there's no sand on it. And then I was using this race glaze leveling compound. Basically, you just want something that's a little gritty, and using a little buffing wheel on the drill to buff this back out, because it gets all scratched up and it'll get to the point where you can't see through it, especially if the sunlight hits this lens. You might as well just close your eyes, because if this is scuffed up at all and the sunlight hits it, it's impossible to see what is happening. And then also be mindful that buffing pad you need to keep with your blasting stuff, because you obviously would not want to use a sand contaminated buffing wheel on anything that you care about. So there is that. And then gloves, of course, safety glasses on underneath this, because the way that handle is, sometimes it'll randomly spurt out a little bit of sand even when it's supposed to be off. You don't want that to catch you in the face. And then I was just using a paint respirator with P100 filters, because to my knowledge, those are fine for this. And then as far as the air compressor setup goes, this one here, it was probably pushing, 6.8 CFM would be my guess. I'm not sure what this one is, couldn't find the sticker on it. I was having to take both of these compressors to run that media blaster, and was running about 110 PSI. The blaster is good for 125, so was running the compressors at 110, and that really seemed to help out the media get through the rust. And so kind of the way I adjusted this one, which obviously if you're going to adjust anything electrical, you make sure it's off, you make sure it's unplugged, and then every time you're messing with it, you make sure it's unplugged, because safety. This one will come on first, and it'll turn off last. So basically this one ran the entirety of the time, and then when the pressure would start to drop, I forget, down to like 88 PSI or something like that, then this one would come on and bring it back up to 110. And so just to kind of help the compressors, had this fan here shooting air into this one to help keep it cool, just because I want to make sure the compressor stays cool. I don't want to be heating up the air as much either, and I want to make sure the electric motor stays cool. So just to help the compressors, as far as longevity and to not beat up on them so much, this fan shooting air into this one, keeping it cool. This fan blowing onto that motor, on the side of this motor here, to help it keep cool. And then I had this oscillating fan shooting air into the compressor area and the motor fan. So this is helping keep that compressor cool. And then this whole apparatus here is basically just a bunch of copper pipe, and it's just to give the air time to cool off and condense moisture out of it. And then had these towels on there, and I soaked them down just to keep the pipe cool, because after a while of running, it actually gets pretty warm. And as far as hooking the compressors into this one is just hose clamped straight in, just because this is the primary one for the garage. And then mine here, it just uses its hose and clips on just like that. And there's a check valve right there and a check valve right there. So I can unclip this and it doesn't drain the system. And vice versa, I could take this one off and it also wouldn't drain the system. The thing that you have to remember with this though, if you do something like this, is you can drain this tank and you can drain this tank, and this whole thing is still gonna have air pressure in it. So I drained both tanks, and then I drained this too, just to get all the stored energy out of the system. But yeah, tying these together, I really liked that. It worked pretty good. The compressors didn't seem to have any trouble. So the Briggs & Stratton air filter was definitely picking up a bunch of dirt, so pretty pleased with that. And yeah, so it took both. This compressor could run the blaster on its own, but it'd have to take breaks and let it charge back up. With both of them though, you just hammer down and go until you run out of media. All right, at the back of the car here, something I wanted to show real quick. There are 5 bolts that hold on each rear bumper bracket. So you got 4 on the outside here, but then there's this 5th one up in the trunk area. So that's where that one is, and that's where that one is. So you gotta take, don't forget this little guy. He's gotta come out too in order for these brackets to come off. For this area of the car, it was just like the whole underside, where they ran the undercoat up here just so that rock chips and stuff wouldn't tear up the paint anywhere near as bad. And I used the grinder with the wire wheel to take that off, just like the whole underside of the car, and that worked pretty good because the Sandblaster was just not wanting to do it because that stuff, that undercoat was so soft. So that worked pretty good there. And it was just like the underside of the car where there was rust hiding under that undercoat. You can actually see right there, that dark spot. That is a rust spot. That's a bunch of surface rust there. That was under that undercoat. So just like the rest of the car, stripping all that off, getting it down to bare metal so that hopefully I won't have any rust coming back in those spots. And then the last thing that was super handy is this cart here has a big shop vac on it. And this is a pre-filter. And the way this works is so the inlet's here, and so it brings that material in, and that material slows down, and as it slows down, it falls into the bottom of the bucket, and then the air exits out the top of it to the shop vac. And this was awesome for cleaning out the car, because we just use this to vacuum out all the media out of the car, just because I didn't want to go scraping around and scuff up my paint that I put in the floorboards, even though it wouldn't be that big of a deal. I just don't want to actively degrade it. But yeah, so this thing worked awesome, sucking up, you know, probably filled this thing up about 3.5 times, and almost no media ended up in the shop vac. It's pretty much just really fine dust, if anything, ended up in the shop vac. The vast majority of it gets dropped out by this little cyclone filter and into that bucket. So that was super cool. All right, and unfortunately, I didn't get a picture of this before it got the filler put over it. But pretty much, here's a picture of this spot of the cowl. And you can see there was a bunch of rust pitting and several holes in the actual metal from where it had rusted through. The top side up here was significantly worse. There was holes probably the two biggest ones were approaching 3/8 of an inch. None of them exceeded past this corner or down into the flat surface, this surface down here. But pretty much from here all the way across to the same spot on the other side, just riddled with pinholes and, you know, stuff up to an 1/8 inch, just all the way across. And so I wanted to sandblast all that, media blast all that, just because I really wasn't up to the task of trying to cut this out and make a patch panel for that, just because I do not feel confident that I would be able to get, you know, the curvature of everything right and the angle of it right and not have anything warp in such a way that the windshield would still seal with its, you know, rubber gasket afterwards. So we're gonna try this out and just see how it goes. I mean, it was clear that it was rusting from the outside. You know, water was getting behind the gasket. That was pretty evident by what was happening down here too. So in blasting the surface where the rust was starting, I feel fairly confident that it hopefully won't come back again. Time will tell, I guess. But anyway, so this stuff is made by 3M and it's called Bondo glass. So it's kind of like Bondo, but then it has fiberglass in it. So it gives it a structural element. So it seemed to be, we did a test patch on just some horrifically rusted sheet metal. It was actually the piece that I cut out of the wheel well, or the spare tire hole. And it was pretty stiff. I mean, it seems like it hopefully will work pretty good. But yeah, so use that to cover up all those pinholes, because again, it's just absolutely terrible. I mean, I would be cutting out pretty much this entire piece all the way across, just because it was just little pinholes riddled all the way across, and then every you know, maybe 6 inches or so, there'd be one big rust hole. So anyways, we'll just see how this goes. Be a nice little test. See if the rust comes back and see if this Bondo glass actually holds up as good as I suspect it will. See some more of it down here. But yeah, so that's how I ended up doing that. Just see how it works out. But anyways, that is that. Moving on to more body work.